So we had a brief meeting, and we had a nice conversation.
Yeah.
Which would have been good to have recorded. But I mean, I just wanted to say something before I forget it.
Yeah.
When you played the clip of the woman dancing, walking to the beat.
Parkinson's, yes.
Yeah. I had that very similar experience when I was doing an internship when I was at Leslie, and a psych geriatric ward. When there was a woman there, Betty, I'll never forget her. She was, schizophrenic and really not, communicative or, but whenever there was music playing, she was always on the beat. Most of the time, she had false teeth, which she never wore, so she'd always talk like, and, but when the beat was on, she might be walking like this, but her feet were always on the beat. I found that really quite fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the ability of music to reach people with certain types of brain damage is just remarkable. Just before this event, a gentleman came up and showed me a flyer for this movie, Alive Inside, which some of you may have heard of, about the effect of music on people with Alzheimer's dementia and how they can't recognize their families, they just don't know where they are. But you put this music on and they're just transported back to where they were when they learned that music. They might sing along. You can see the light coming back into their eyes. It reawakes the memories. I actually have a colleague that works on this powerful ability of music to trigger autobiographical memories. And in these patients, very, very little else seems to be able to do that for them. And yet that can actually bring them back to a state of remembering something about who they were.
But maybe you could help me understand, because there are people who do have a really difficult time walking on the beat.
Yes.
I just came from a class. I think I mentioned I go to Milwaukee every year.
Right.
And there's a art therapy graduate program.
Okay.
So I do a workshop every year.
Yeah.
And there's always one or two students who cannot reproduce a beat in their feet.
In their body?
In their body.
Do you get the sense that they perceive it, they just can't coordinate their movements with it, or do you think they just don't even get the concept of what a beat is?
I think it's a combination. And there's something else that you showed, how producing a beat and perceiving it.
Yeah.
Like I'll tell students, if you have to do something like ta 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 ta, your tongue can only go so fast.
Right.
So the actual inability to physically do something can affect your rhythm.
Yes.
Whereas the nervous system is going much faster.
Right.
So I can go taka 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 ta, taka 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 ta. So I can produce that.
Right.
So that's a question there.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be an intimate connection between, like, we feel the beat right around the tempo that we can actually move, right? I mean, that's an interesting fact. The nervous system neurons are firing often at 1,000 times per second, but we can't feel the beat at 1,000 times per second, right? Or if the beat gets too long, like every 2 seconds, we can't feel it anymore either. It seems to exist sort of in the range of our body rhythms,
right?
Even though it's a neural phenomenon. So that's why, again, it's this brain-body connection.
And 120 seems to be a common walking tempo. Is that in your research?
That's right. Yeah.
Unless you come from Ohio, we walk a little slower. That's true.
Actually, there's that famous plot of from some psychologist did this of walking tempo versus population size in cities. Does anybody know this? And there's a very linear relationship. The smaller the city, the slower people are walking on the sidewalk. So people walk really fast in Manhattan, but you go out to the countryside and people. So I actually wonder if you looked at the tempo of music that people like to listen to, if that would also reflect the kind of urban density that they're surrounded by.
That would make sense.
Yeah. Right. I was so struck by your breathing. I'd never heard anything like that. Is that something you invented?
Oh, I invented breathing. Yeah. I wish I had copyright.
I love it. I love that stuff.
Well, that particular kind of thing was actually, I have a one-man play, and I first started doing that kind of breathing in performance as at the end of a play, I had this big accident, and I'm trying to breathe into the horn. But I did a performance with a dancer who was born with no legs. And that kind of, my breathing was the soundtrack for that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you have a name for that technique? Or?
I don't know if you call it rhythmic breath of fire.
It's so striking, yeah.
But I mean, a lot of people do. I mean, people who practice, that kind of yoga breathing do develop a capacity. But I think the difference is to be able to change meter and keep track of the meter. So that's taken me some practice.
Yeah.
I'll just give another demonstration. If I go 1, 2, 3, da, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, da, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, da, 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 da. So that makes me think of those experiments that you did, in order to think ahead. So I'm doing one rhythm, but I have to, as I'm doing 7, I have to be able to think ahead at the same time. Yeah. And only we humans can do that, and some of those birds.
It's just us and Snowball. Yeah. No, it's amazing that we don't share this with. I mean, even our close. At least we don't seem to. I should say this is a young line of research, and it's possible that more studies will come out that will show that maybe monkeys or apes really can do beat in the way that we do. But it's very few studies that exist right now, but the ones that do exist suggest that there's something very different about the way they do it and the way we do it.
Have you done any study with meter or rhythm and the effect of different meters? Like I just spoke about how the 6/8 seems to be quite prevalent in West Africa, and how the dance has this kind of thing with it.
Yeah. We did something where it wasn't quite looking at musical meter, but we did a study where we looked at this old idea that instrumental music can reflect something about the rhythm of a composer's native language. And this is an old intuition that's circulated for a while, and this is brought up often in the context of Western classical music, and you probably can tell us more about in other musics, but the claim was that something about Debussy's piano music somehow reflects the rhythms of spoken French, or that Elgar's symphonic music somehow reflects the rhythm of spoken British English. And this had been around kind of as an idea for 50 years or so without any evidence, but just an intuition. But we were able to show, actually, by taking empirical measurements of rhythm in speech and music, that there was some truth to this idea, that there were certain patterns you could see in the rhythms of these languages that were reflected in instrumental music.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure about that, but that brings up something that I wanted to ask you about. In my travels, it seems that some cultures are good with time up to certain increments. Like Swiss, culture is known for, precise time, being on time. So if there's a meeting at 3 o'clock, the meeting will start at 3 o'clock. If you go to Ghana, in West Africa, if the meeting's at 3 o'clock, it's not going to start at 3.
Right.
Or even Italy, when I would perform there, I got to Sonny Rollins, the great saxophone player, jazz player, ended up opening up for the group that I was in, because the concert, I think, was supposed to start at 8.
Oh.
And he knew that no one was going to come at 8.
Oh.
So if the opening band were to start,
nobody.
It would be like midnight before.
Oh, okay, all right.
So he just said, well, I'm going to play now.
Right.
So, but if you go to Ghana, the meeting might not start on time, but the ability to perceive time down to the microsecond. Like, I'll give an example. Like, if I do this, I'll go bing, 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 Dare I have you try that with me? Let's try that. 1, 2, ready, go. So that's a little closer to the Swiss version. that third note is just a millisecond faster. Now it's getting closer to the chimpanzee version. So, I mean, I don't know how that relates to the language, but it's kind of interesting how, one culture is so precise when it comes to, and I mentioned Ghana because the drumming in Ghana, and Tufts has a lot of Ghanaian drumming.
Right.
It's some of the most complex rhythms in the world.
It's amazing, yeah.
Ghanaian, I mean, Indian, North Indian, South Indian.
Yeah, I do think the rhythmic culture you grow up in does influence how sophisticated your general rhythmic processing is, right? So, but you mentioned there are people that you encounter who just don't seem to have any sense of beat. I wonder if have you been to Ghana? Do you know if that's true there too, or?
That's a good question. No, I haven't been to Ghana.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
I suspect though, if you grow up at such an early age, listening to that kind of rhythm and dancing and being around a live drumming, it just kind of gets in your blood.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
This would be a good moment for some audience questions to just continue doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Ron.
Yeah, hi. It's great.
Should we use this mic?
Your mic?
Ooh, 1, 2. So we have this mic without the reverb, please.
I had a question regarding the cockatoo and the Parkinson's patient, which is there any way to evaluate or understand what the residual impact on the Parkinson's patient was of that? Or for that matter, how much of what the cockatoo did had an afterlife? Did it continue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with the Parkinson's patients, so Michael Thout that I mentioned has been developing that is using that phenomenon as a therapy called rhythmic auditory stimulation. And the observation is they walk better when the music and rhythm is on, but the question is, does that generalize at all? And he has some evidence that there is some improvement. So he compared traditional gait therapy to this rhythmic auditory stimulation therapy for Parkinson's patients with kind of medium level severity. And he found that that this rhythmic therapy had somewhat better outcomes in terms of improvement of gait post therapy. Now, of course, it doesn't last forever, and they do get worse. It's a degenerative disease, but it does seem to have some. If you do it regularly enough, it does seem to have some lasting benefit.
So does it kind of get internalized in any sense?
Well, that's a really interesting question. They can't do it completely in their heads. It's not like they can just turn on music in their heads and then walk to that music. There does seem to be a need for the music to be coming from outside. But once that's done, that can seem to kind of re-coordinate movement to a certain extent that it does carry over a little bit. And then the cockatoo, if the music turns off, he stops, right? He does, but probably so do we, right? Right. Except for Stan.
So we need to use the mic.
Two questions. One about complex or virtuosic rhythms such as your own, or South Indian dance or Balinese dance, where a lot of people have to get together to create very complex, fast rhythms, which press the envelope of what one individual, however virtuosic, can do. I'd like to hear what you think about that. And for Dr. Patel, has anybody administered L-Dopa to cockatoos and monkeys to see what happens?
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Might you have been thinking about monkey chants? You familiar with that? Yeah. It's interesting, like one thought for me that has me going off on a whole bunch of other things. So there's this group of people, I forget exactly where they are. It's in Indonesia. Do you remember where they were?
Kitchak is in Bali.
Yeah.
It's an Indian culture. It's a Hindu-derived culture.
Yes. Who do healing based on this group activity of this intense chanting. It's similar to what I was doing. And they build up such an energy that, I kind of equated to opening up different chakras in a way, where you start to bring in the console. This is another thing I don't think we talked about. There's the idea that certain rhythms can attract spirits. And that, let's say you had a great-great-great-grandfather who really liked this beat. So when he died, his mind didn't totally dissipate. So as we know, our mind stuff is substantive. So, and bodies attract each other. That's a law of physics. So if you have a rhythm or an idea of a concept that could draw in the spirit of your great-great-grandfather, because he's still attached to that pulse. And when that spirit comes in, he comes with certain information, knowledge. It's kind of like Catholicism. So I don't know, that part doesn't answer your question. Yes.
Here, I'm gonna.
I don't need mine. Do you see any correlation between tone deafness and lack of rhythmic sense?
There's actually some research on that. So, truly musically tone deaf people. So a lot of people say just informally, a lot of people just say I'm tone deaf, by which they often mean they don't like their own singing voice. They don't think they sing well, but they have a perfectly good musical ear. But there's some research. Actually, there's now quite a bit of research on truly musically tone deaf people who can't tell two melodies apart, can't tell when things are grossly out of tune, can't remember and recognize what should be very familiar melodies in their culture unless the words are present. Ulysses S. Grant, the famous general, was apparently tone deaf. He said, I know two tunes, one of them is Yankee Doodle and the other isn't. So it's very serious problems with musical melody recognition. For many of those people, the primary problem seems to be pitch related, and it's very variable about their rhythmic perception abilities. Some do and some don't have problems. Now there's just very recently some research on people who have beat deafness, which is they're not tone deaf. They test them to make sure they're not tone deaf, and yet they just don't seem to perceive a beat in music. And it's not just that they can't synchronize to it; they just don't seem to get that underlying sense of a pulse coming out of the music that so many of us feel so intuitively, which is really interesting. So we can look in their brains and see what's different. Are there connections between auditory and motor regions that are different, for example, in their brain? I'm sorry? Not the imaging yet, just the behavioral studies so far. It's very young research.
Were they born like that?
You know, that's a good question. There's only 1 or 2 published cases right now, and they're adults, so we don't know.
Because I always tell students that there's not really any such thing as tone deafness. Because if you were tone deaf, you wouldn't know how to modulate your voice when you had conversation, and no one talks like that. We all naturally modulate. But there does seem to be... the ability to make song seems to atrophy if not developed at a young age.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an area where science, I think, has really shown us that there is such a thing as musical tone deafness. I mean, an interesting thing is that these people do sound fine. They don't speak on a monotone. But part of the problem is that they seem to have problems with hearing small differences in pitch. And when we speak, most of our voice goes up and down, but those glides are much bigger than these little nuances that we listen for in music. So, there's a big question in the field now whether people that are truly musically tone deaf can be trained out of it, or whether it's completely untrainable, like color blindness. You can't train somebody out of color blindness. It's just the way that their rods and cones work. So this is something that needs to be studied more. Yeah.
So,
Hi.
so back to your story about people who are beat deaf. Okay, if you're drawing the parallel between having a beat and being able to recognize a beat and being able to use language, right, and having those connections in the brain. So the next question is, are the people who are beat deaf missing some language capacity? capacity? I mean, I'm a linguist, right? So
Right,
that's my
right.
question.
So that's a really important question. If there's some connection between the vocal learning circuitry and the beat circuitry, why wouldn't beat deaf people also have trouble with speech? So I've emphasized this auditory motor connection as one of the really important shared things. But of course, beat involves a lot more than that, just that one connection. It's a complex circuit that involves many brain areas. And so beat deafness could be a problem with another connection besides that particular auditory motor connection. So, but you're onto something. I mean, if there's some deep connection to vocal learning, then we should see some evidence that beat and phonology, for example, and actually there is some research now looking at relationships between beat-based processing and phonological processing.
Whether, you mean like stress timed or syllable timed?
No, this is just the ability to segment words into units and manipulate the units, the phonemes. So,
finding syllables and things like that.
yeah, and right,
Yeah.
moving segments around in words and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, so
Well,
there's some work starting
We
on
should
that.
talk about that.
Time for a couple more. If you could pass the microphone down to Martin McKenna, who's right over here.
It's actually a follow-up to that question. I worked with some young boys who were autistic and went into a class and brought music. And when I sang, they were in various places. And as soon as I started to do Looby Loo, which was a movement song, they started to join me. So it was the movement that brought them to participate, not the singing.
Ah.
And when I finished, it was the first time in this class, when I left, one of the teachers came up to me afterwards and said it was the first time one of the little boys had ever spoken in class. So
Wow.
it was something about the movement
Yeah.
that freed this young boy up to start speaking.
That's really interesting.
And I used to teach music years ago, and I remember I was teaching a class of 400 women to sing a song for their graduation. And there would be women who had voices that were not on pitch. And the way I got them to get onto pitch was to find their pitch. And as soon as I could find where they were, they could then move up with me. And so it comes back to your notion of being tone deaf. Somehow along
Yeah.
the way, somebody said to them, don't sing.
Right,
You know, you're
right.
not on pitch, and be quiet.
Right.
And as soon as you could open them up to do the singing, then in fact they could reclaim their voice.
That's-
So
yeah.
there's so much work
Yeah,
that
so-
we could be doing
Right,
to
right.
open people up to singing
Yeah, I
and
think that
finding
is-
their voice.
I think
So
that's-
your work is wonderful.
Yeah, I think there's
And his work is superb.
But I just want to say one thing about that. I know we're running out of time. I think that,
Let's have Robert do the last question.
okay. I think that we're a little too obsessed with pitch and singing. In New Zealand, the Maori say that if you're singing on tune, you sound too British. So, I mean, I love working with people who have those kinds of things. And then sometimes it does work to match their pitch, but sometimes you do that, they change as soon as you go to their pitch. But I think it's okay to sing out of tune, because the main thing is just to get the vibration and the sound.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's have a big chord. Just whatever note you want to sing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Arnett did it, right? Well, just briefly, that movie, Alive Inside, is amazing. There are people who, for 10 years, didn't speak, didn't do anything. They put their little iPod on, they hear some music, they just light up. They start talking. One woman tosses her walker away and starts dancing with the guy. And he's got this project, Music and Memory, to just get everyone in nursing homes with these iPods instead of drugging them out. Just amazing. But there's a book called The Healing Power of the Drum, and also in a lot of Oliver Sacks' music, Ophelia, that the rhythm is something that is a part of you from the time you're in the womb, and that the rhythm is out there all the time. The problem is we're blocking it out with all these stuff we do, or running around. In the drum book, they go to Times Square and people are walking real fast and they come out and play real fast with drums. Nobody stops. They go back a few days later and play very slowly, and more people stopped and changed their walking pattern because of the drumming. And I know when he was alive, John Cage was asked, well, what do you listen to? He said, I don't have any records. I just open the window. Basically, it's out there, and we block it out with all the hardware we're walking around with. So, and just real quickly, the rhythm of an MRI machine, I had a brain injury in '06. Couldn't listen to the jazz I grew up with. I think I actually told you the story at the lily pad. And it was the rhythm and tapping of the sound of an MRI machine that brought it back, which was, it's a long story. There's a whole movie about it being made. So.
Wow.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's an amazing place to stop. So I want to thank you so much for just awesome presentation, just amazing. So